Three, two, one. Are we on? All right, here we are. Welcome everyone to the 2020 Rappahannock Democrats Congressional Forum. I'm Leslie Coburn. First, let's commend our four candidates running during the most difficult campaign season since the founding of this country. No catfish fries, no church breakfasts, and no hugs. On top of that, the crisis in this country has deepened almost beyond comprehension. 20 million people lost their jobs last month. 33 million have filed for unemployment. People are poor and hungry. The numbers at the Rappahannock Food Pantry have gone up 400% since this time last year, and Congress is buffeted by the need to spend $3 trillion and counting in relief, not knowing how much will be collared by Wall Street. So tonight, let's get excited about this important race. Each of you has 2 minutes to introduce yourselves and 2 minutes to answer the questions. You will then have 1 minute to close. For opening remarks, the order is alphabetical. After that, we rotate the order alphabetically. There will be a 15-second warning to wrap up, and then the dreaded mute button. At the end, each candidate has a minute to make concluding remarks. So let's begin. First, we start with Roger Dean Huffstetler, followed by John Lazinski, Claire Russo, and Dr. Cameron Webb. RD.
Well, thank you, Leslie, for being here, and thank you, Rappahannock Democrats, for putting this on today. Listen, I'm running for Congress to give more folks a fair shot. I'm not in this race because I think I can win. I'm in this race because I have a problem with inequality. We live in an area where we have a world-class research institution, but not many Virginians can get in or afford to go. We have some of the best hospitals in the world, and yet some of the highest healthcare insurance premiums in the world. We live in a place where the downtown Charlottesville is booming, but not everybody can see themselves there. I'm in this race to make sure that the folks in Charlotte County can get a healthcare public option on their exchange. I'm in this race so the kids in Buckingham County don't have to go to McDonald's to do their homework to get internet. I'm in this race so families like mine growing up can have affordable housing and can grow and become a part of the changing economy. And finally, I'm in this race because I understand this district. I know what it's like to live paycheck to paycheck. My family lived in Section 515 housing for a while growing up. And as most folks know, my parents struggled with substance abuse, and it killed my dad. But I'm also a Marine veteran of Afghanistan and Iraq, and I have 2 degrees from Harvard University. So the 5th District is a mix of the Piedmont and the small college towns, and so am I. And finally, I'm in this race to make sure people have a fair shot. We cannot live up to those words in the Declaration of Independence that everyone is created equal. If someone can be shot while jogging because of the color of their skin, if someone is denied the chance to enter the changing economy because of their zip code, or because health outcomes are based on someone's race or where they live. And we've got to come together and do our job and make sure that everyone is treated equally. Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
John?
Well, thank you, Leslie. Rappahannock County, you know my body of work over the past decade. And many of you have become good friends since I ran for the House of Delegates in 2009. You've supported me on the Board of Supervisor meetings when I stood up for what I thought was right, from the Code of Conduct to the Second Amendment Sanctuary Resolution. And Heidi and I are appreciative that many of you stood with us through the frivolous lawsuits and the personal attacks on our family. Now, I'm running for Congress because I'm more convinced than ever that this awful pandemic presents the opportunity to hit a hard reset and address the challenges that have been ignored for years, but have now been exposed and magnified by the coronavirus. And there are 3 distinct issues that I would like to focus on in Congress. First, healthcare. To not only build on the Affordable Care Act with a strong public option, but to finally address the increasing chronic disease and our mental health crisis. Transition off an employer-based system that's the root of our 30 million uninsured and why many of our 33 million plus unemployed no longer have coverage. Healthcare is a right, not a privilege. Second, address the numerous and growing inequalities in our society. As we rebuild our economy, let's pay a living wage and work to close the gap in income inequality. Let's close the digital divide by investing in rural broadband to eliminate the haves and have-nots in education, telehealth, public safety, and economic opportunity. Let's stand up for gender equality in the ERA, women's reproductive rights, LGBTQ rights, and the Equality Act. Let's be firm on tackling inequalities by being forever diligent around the matters of justice. And thirdly, let's work to fight climate change as part of rebuilding our economy, reduce our carbon footprint, wean ourselves off fossil fuels, protect our environment to ensure clean air and water, and focus on renewable energy sources and green jobs. I'm running for Congress because I want to be part of reshaping our nation for the better, not by trying to
Okay, that's mute. Claire? Okay,
Hello? Can you hear me?
okay, you're on. Claire.
Okay. All right. So I am Claire Russo, as many of you know, and I am a Marine. I served in Iraq and Afghanistan. I worked as a civilian advisor to the Army. I have served as a fellow with the Council on Foreign Relations, and I have spent the better part of my professional career serving this country and fighting for equality, for women's rights, and women's inclusion. Why am I running for Congress right now? The short answer is that I am unwilling to stand on the sidelines and watch this administration trample on this country. When my daughter is worried about the guns my husband carries on the battlefield in her classroom, it is unacceptable and it is too personal, and I had to stand up. When my husband is on the battlefield in Iraq worrying about his daughter's safety in her classroom, it's just too personal. When families are choosing between feeding the family and getting affordable health care, it's just unacceptable to me, and I'm unwilling to stand on the sidelines. And finally, women's health care is not an afterthought. My grandmother died getting an illegal abortion, and I will not stand aside and watch the Republicans strip women of their rights to their health care, to choice, and to control of their bodies. We have seen candidates like me and Elaine Luria and Abigail Spanberger win in districts like this. I am ready to do this job on day one, and I can win in November. I am ready to fight the tough fights for this district and for you.
Cameron.
Well, good evening, Rappahannock Dems. My name is Cameron Webb, and just quickly, just give you a sense of who I am. I'm an internal medicine doctor at the University of Virginia. I'm a lawyer with a focus in health policy, and I'm an educator at the University of Virginia. But that tells you about what I do, not necessarily who I am. And who I am is I'm a kid from Spotsylvania County. So for those of you in Rappahannock, I grew up on just the other side of Culpeper County. And I'm married to a woman from Appomattox County, so right here in the 5th. We met at the University of Virginia 19 years ago in college, right here in the 5th. And ultimately, after our training in medicine kind of took us around the country, we came back here to raise our families. So I'm here in this district serving our community as a physician, taking care of the residents of the 5th as a physician. And we're here for service. We're here because of a passion for serving our community. And so, I think for me, there's a story that I can tell about a patient I recently took care of that kind of illustrates why I'm in this. And there was a woman who I was taking care of in the hospital just a few months ago. And unfortunately, she passed away on the first day that I was on service. And she was 63 years old. And I'll never forget that we called her daughter, who came in to talk to her. And her daughter started telling me all these stories about her mom and about how wonderful she was. But as I went through the list of her chronic diseases, her diabetes, her high blood pressure, a lot of conditions that we could have managed with access to adequate primary care, I realized that she was robbed of at least 12 years of life expectancy. and that's not the health system that we should have. I know that when I look around our communities, when I talk to patients, I'm not just seeing healthcare or a clinic environment. I'm seeing housing and education and so many different things. So I'm in this race because I'm passionate about fixing our healthcare system. I'm passionate about addressing our climate crisis, and I'm passionate about economic mobility, and I hope to have your support in June. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you all. Those are the introductory remarks. First question, this goes to John, and then you're in the same order, everyone. First question is, what makes you the strongest candidate to defeat Denver Riggleman or Bob Good in November?
It's a function of showing a level of experience that is going to be respected by people in this district. You know, I really believe that having won twice in a Republican majority county as a Democrat, especially on the Board of Supervisors, shows that I can communicate across the aisle, that I can reach out to independents and to moderate Republicans. I think those are voters that we're going to need in November in order to win. Leslie, you did an absolutely magnificent job in 2018, and we all know the math that we fell about 20,000 votes short. You know, we need another 10 to 12,000 votes to win, and I firmly believe that we can do that with a candidate that has shown a level of experience, that is a business person. I think I'm the only business person that's a candidate here in the primary. Shown that I've been living in Virginia for 35 years, that I'm a gun owner and a hunter and a military veteran. I bring a body of work that I think is going to be very appealing to those voters that we need to attract from the independents and across the aisles in order to get the number of votes to win in November.
Thank you. Claire?
Yeah, so I think that this is an issue of being able to talk to a plurality of voters and residents in this district. And, you know, like Cameron, I was raised here in Virginia. I'm married to a man right here from Albemarle County, Greene County. And we come from conservative families in Virginia. And I've spent a lot of time around the kitchen table talking with folks about gun safety, talking with gun owners about gun safety, talking with folks who are in those county meetings, and so I think it's about being able to talk to a plurality of voters, and I think it's also about having a willingness to stand up and fight the fights that have to be fought. I think we lose as Democrats if we're unwilling to talk about guns in the general. I think we lose as Democrats if we are unwilling to talk about choice. And absolutely, healthcare is the issue of this election. The pandemic only made it more abundantly clear that we must act. The status quo is not acceptable. And I have fought real tough fights. I have been told that I was not going to have justice and I was unwilling to stand down. And I will apply that same fight to healthcare and to the fights that matter the most to this district.
Thank you. Cameron?
Yeah, so it's simple for me. It's three reasons. The first is on the issues. The second is on the demographics. And then third, it's by consensus. So on the issues, I agree with Claire. I think this is the healthcare election. I think this election here in 2020 is focused on the fact that healthcare is currently 1/5 of our economy. It's the largest employer in the United States, and everybody agrees that it's broken. And I think that what's unique about me is the expertise that I bring to that space. I'm not only a practicing clinician, I'm the director of health policy at the University of Virginia. I was appointed by Governor Northam to Virginia's Medicaid board, where we expanded Medicaid to almost 400,000 Virginians. And then I worked for President Obama in the White House, on the White House healthcare team, implementing the Affordable Care Act. The experience and the expertise that I bring on healthcare, on the number one issue in this race, I think that's going to be critical. And let's keep in mind that Denver Riggleman won to some extent in 2018 because he said he was going to preserve the Affordable Care Act and build upon it. But I think he's got a record that we can really prosecute on that. The second is by the demographics. Listen, we've got a large number of African-American voters down South Side. And I think that as Democrats, for us, it's about expanding the electorate fielding a full team. I think we've got 33,000 registered Black voters who didn't vote in the 2018 elections, 38,000 Black voters who aren't registered. So we've got some room to go. And then finally, by consensus, I worked in the Obama administration, but as part of my White House fellowship, I also worked for 6 months in the Trump White House. And it was rough. It was hard to be in that building. Some of you know the story of how they kicked me out of the office. They had my desk in the hallway and didn't talk to me for 2 months. But eventually, we were able to make headway. I was able to lead a drug pricing task force and stop them from hurting Americans when it comes to drug pricing because of the fact that I know how to talk to people who have different views than I do. I grew up right here in Central Virginia, married to a woman from Southside. I think I've got what it takes to win.
Okay, thank you. RD.
Well, let me say first, unequivocally, everybody on this phone call, and I do mean everybody, would be a better member of Congress than Denver Riggleman or Bob Good. Come on. I mean, so whoever wins, we're going to put our full weight behind them. I don't know what that means for if I lose and I'm a two-time failed congressional candidate, but you got my support team. And but look, this is a Trump district. That's the thing you got to come back to every day. Donald Trump is going to carry this district. Now, he carried it by 10.5 points last time. I don't think he'll hit that margin. I think it'll be somewhere between 4 and 6 points. So whoever you send forward, if you want that person to be a member of Congress, you have to envision how that person gets, we'll call them Huffstetler Trump voters, but who you insert the person here. And just ask yourself, who do you think is most likely to do that? A person whose grandmother worked in a textile mill for 40 years who voted for Donald Trump? A person whose uncle is a Trump supporter in North Carolina who's a Vietnam veteran? To me, obviously, I believe in my own candidacy. The answer is pretty straightforward. We've got to build on the coalition. It's called a base plus election. So we do need to register voters. We do need to make sure that African Americans are engaged in our race and excited. But when Joe Biden comes to this district, he's going to be welcome because he's going to get 47 or 48% of the vote. And we've just got to find those 2 percentage points, working closely with Senator Warner and his team. And, I believe in what I'm doing. I'm from the working class. I'm for the working class. And I think that message will carry the day in some of our big Republican counties. The district is 40% independent, 40% independent. They're about the same number of Democrats and Republicans in this district. And so even if you get all the Democrats to vote, you still got to win a high percentage of those independent voters. I think my background as a veteran from a rural family in North Carolina really gives me the inside edge to do that. No discredit to my colleagues here. I think they're all fantastic.
Okay, thank you. Next question, and this goes to Claire first. What are the most critical issues for Virginians in the 5th District, and how will you address those issues when you get to Washington? Now, let me add to this, since you've all talked a little bit about healthcare. If you've already mentioned healthcare, tell us what you're going to do about it. Claire.
Right. Well, I mean, expand access, lower cost is the bottom line on this, but we do have to look at the delivery of healthcare. I mean, I support the status quo is no longer acceptable, and I think there are a lot of great plans out there that we need to act on. And we have got to address the needs of the people who need it the most. The expansion of Medicaid is access we cannot afford to lose. And so I support healthcare for every American through a public option. I also, as I've said before, I believe that in the healthcare issue, we have got to address women's healthcare. It is not talked about enough, and it is in a critical state right now with what the Republicans are doing to attack women's rights in terms of healthcare. So it's those issues need to go together. The issue I find myself talking about a lot, and maybe that's just by spending more time in some rural areas, is guns. And I think that we have got to institute universal background checks. We have got to pass the Violence Against Women Act, and we have got to close the loopholes in this country. There is no way after the state legislature act that we're going to get through this election without taking a stance and being able to bring people together so that we can act on these issues. We can't ask kids to go to school and learn if they're fearing for their lives in their classroom. It's absolutely unacceptable. We can't have single mothers at home, locked at home during COVID, fearing for their lives because convicted domestic abusers are allowed to have guns. It's unacceptable. So, those are two issues that are absolutely critical to us moving forward, coupled with when the choice, I think, has got to be the third issue.
Okay. Cameron.
Yeah, so for me, healthcare is certainly top of mind. What I usually say is that for me, the top issues are just about making sure that everyone in this district, everyone in this Commonwealth, and everyone in the nation has opportunities for health and for success. And so in terms of the health piece, just to put a finer point on it, I'm in favor of ensuring that there's a national, a public health insurance option that everyone can have access to. That's the 30 million uninsured individuals, certainly, but making sure that we're expanding that access urgently. Kind of additionally, one thing that I talk a lot about is we need to urgently decouple employment and health insurance. And this COVID crisis has taught us that certainly. And I think that the next piece is, insofar as we still have private insurance, we need some serious reform building upon what the Affordable Care Act did. I think those are key components. But for me, mental health access is another big one. Long-term care, another huge one, right? And addressing the costs there. I completely agree with Claire. I think women's health is a huge component. Reproductive rights in particular, it's a woman's right to choose, and we need to protect that at all costs, especially with the court cases moving up to the Supreme Court designed to strike down Roe versus Wade. The second issue I'll talk about is climate change and addressing our climate crisis. We need to urgently make sure that we're able to decarbonize by mid-century, and we need to take every step to make sure we're doing that, speed our way toward a clean economy, really do the work. And I think there's some great science behind that. And as a scientist, I'm going to lean into the science that tells us exactly what we need to do. Finally, economic mobility. That's everybody having opportunities for success. So that's equity in education. That's addressing our criminal justice system and the issues of mass incarceration. That's really addressing our housing crisis in certain parts of the district that we're seeing. So many different pieces that do come together. And that happens through infrastructure. But, the elephant in the room, of course, is we need to get through COVID-19. And I think making sure that we're both pairing the critical healthcare issues and the economic crisis, we're ready to tackle that. And I hope we'll talk about that some more.
Okay. RD.
In my travels around the Fifth, I think if I could sum up what my personal view is, what's on people's mind is they just want to see them and their family in the future of the country. And I think a lot of people in the Fifth can feel left out because maybe their grandma worked in a textile mill, or their granddad made furniture, or, they grew tobacco. So there's a lot of stories like that where families have just been left out, many times because of their zip code, and sometimes because of the zip code and the color of their skin. And that's important for us to recognize that there's a lot of disparities within different communities here. Listen, healthcare is an important issue. I support the public option on the rural exchanges right now, and support reintroducing 10 Kane's Medicare X plan. But I also support caps on cost, negotiation of drug prices. And those are very important things to add as well to make sure that nobody is going to go broke because of something that happens in their healthcare. As Cameron said, economic mobility is an issue that you're going to hear about everywhere in the Fifth. There are people within Charlottesville city limits that feel the pressure here that they can't get ahead, as to our most rural areas as well. And this comes down to, do people have the ability to move between job to job and not worry about their healthcare? Do they have the ability to upgrade their skills every 5-10 years? What does that look like? What's the workforce development plan for that area? Those are such important factors that one of the things we're going to do in our campaign, is we talked about before, is a community college industry partnership, where we try to partner the local commerce with community colleges so people are getting degrees with jobs. As Cameron mentioned, there's so many intertwined issues here. I would encourage you to visit our website and visit the plans tab. We have an extensive plan for affordable housing, which I mentioned at the onset was something that my family needed at one point, and everybody should have access to, which is why we support reforming housing zoning, through a competitive grant program. And we also have an extensive criminal justice plan there, which we worked with Jim Hensley to put together, which we're very proud of.
Thank you. John.
Well, I think Claire and Cameron and RD laid it out pretty clearly for healthcare, and I certainly talked about it in my opening remarks about the need to improve upon the Affordable Care Act and bring in a public option. But I think something that's very, very critical to the citizens of the 5th District is getting them back to work. And frankly, it's our economy. And I'm looking at this from a three-stage approach, I guess. Short term, we need to restart this economy without rekindling the virus. And we may have a second wave that comes in the fall. We may not have a vaccine for over a year. We're going to be dealing with this coronavirus for for quite some time. So we're probably going to need to continue to prime the pump. We've spent we've put in about 30% of GDP in priming the pump right now in the stimulus programs. We need to look at doing more of that. We also, and a second stage of that would be what I call onshoring and nearshoring and tightening up our supply chain. We can create jobs for persons in the 5th district by bringing a lot of the manufacturing that we've had overseas back into the United States, especially around what we've seen with this pandemic, whether it's test kits or whether it's PPE. It's almost a national security issue that these have been created overseas in countries that haven't necessarily had our best interests at heart. Bring those jobs back here into the United States, bring them into the 5th district, and shorten our supply chain so that we can not be so exposed. And third, in the long look, let's create 21st century technology jobs. Let's create them around renewable energy, green jobs. We have a lot of jobs we can create through improving our infrastructure, roads, bridges, tunnels, waterways, and then improve on that through battery technology, wind and solar. People want to go back to work. I focus on the economy.
Okay, thank you. Now I just want to go back for a second to healthcare. The coronavirus has exposed the cracks in our healthcare system. In the presidential debate, we heard a lot about people being very attached to their employer's health plan. Now that millions of people have lost their jobs, how do you plan to ensure decent healthcare for all? Let's start with Cameron.
Sure. And this is something that I see up close and personal from delivering patient care. This is something I see from my perspective as a health policy leader, both at the university, here in the Commonwealth, and also federally when I worked in the White House for President Obama. Often people will say that folks like their employer-based insurance, but the challenge that I usually give them is, if you were to be in the ICU for 2 weeks, would that insurance serve you well? That's private insurance or employer-based insurance. And the truth of the matter is most people can't answer that question. And I regret that in the midst of this coronavirus pandemic, we're seeing that tested in a way that we've never seen it before. With over 30 million people filing for uninsurance and at least 20 to 25% of those needing new health insurance, the fact of the matter is we've never had a moment like this one where people are saying, hey, maybe it serves us well to have different options. We understand that for a lot of folks in America, there are different values that define what they want in the healthcare system. For some, it's that everyone have access to care. For others, it's that they have choice. And I think the plan that I'm proposing, the idea of urgently creating a public health insurance option, what it does is it allows Americans to vote with their feet. They're able to access a plan that has minimum overhead, similar to the Medicare program, which is usually to the tune of 2 to 3%, as opposed to the up to 20% private insurance can use, right? And that gives people a chance to choose a plan that's more affordable for them. And if that exerts a market effect that moves people toward public insurance, well, that's only a good thing. And private insurance would have to innovate, would have to do something to remain viable. And I talk to employers quite often, and almost the resounding chorus is that they would have no problem being out of the insurance game. It's the tax benefit that they're really leaning into. I think with smart design and with real knowledge of all of the aspects of our healthcare system, we can make sure that people have care in the spaces where they need it. The complement of our public programs, and also the choice, if they do believe that a private insurance plan is better for them, that's available. I think that's the right next step toward the healthcare system that we need.
Thank you. RD.
Well, I'm very lucky. I grew up in a union household, so we never had to pay more than $2 for a prescription. We never worried about healthcare insurance. But obviously, this is a problem that's deeply embedded in our society right now. So let me walk you through the plan that we have. The first thing is we've got to protect and expand Obamacare. As I mentioned earlier, we want to keep caps on costs, negotiation drug prices, and early Medicare buy-in is also something that I support. I want to make sure that folks can have access to that plan early on. Another big part of our plan is protect rural healthcare. And so let's walk through a couple things there that'll be really helpful. The labor and delivery ward in Henry County may close. And if that happens, women are going to have to drive further and further to a hospital. Distance to a hospital materially impacts maternal and fetal outcomes. And so we don't want any of the folks here in the 5th having to deal with that. They ought to be able to go to a hospital nearby and give birth in a hospital. And a couple things here. We can't have telemedicine in our rural communities if we don't have broadband, but we're seeing some of that happen now. We need to increase the loan forgiveness plan for folks who will relocate to a rural community. I just heard this week that the last primary care doctor in Madison County left. And that's just not a situation we need to be in. We need to make sure everybody can have a primary care physician that they can talk to that can help them. The last thing is that women's healthcare is healthcare, full stop. And the Huffstetler household, we just released an ad today with my wonderful wife, Dr. Emily Huffstetler. And I can tell you, we talk about women's healthcare in my house every single day, whether it's the number of patients she saw, or a couple months ago, a woman gave birth in the parking lot of Martha Jefferson. That was a heck of a story I heard after that day. And so, I want to honor what my wife does and certainly try to understand what she goes through as she works with women and their healthcare. But listen, there is no reason that a politician, particularly a man, should ever be between a woman and her doctor.
Thank you. John.
Thank you. Well, good ideas again from both Cameron and RD. And I didn't hear anything that I'm certainly going to disagree with. As I said when I started off in the opening remarks, I'm very much for providing a public option. In addition, building off of the Affordable Care Act. What I heard, what I do know is that we're spending 20% of our GDP on healthcare right now, and we're getting inferior outcomes. We're spending more in this country than more countries around the world, and our results are inferior. The money is there. It's unfortunately it's disproportionate with the insurance companies, with big pharma, and we have to restructure our healthcare so that we can take out the inequalities, because we have such inequalities here. Telemedicine is the future of rural health. And I know that I've talked a lot about, and a big issue for me is rural broadband. 80% of how we deliver healthcare in the future in the rural areas may very well be through broadband. And we've got to make sure that our rural communities have it and that our rural hospitals have it, because we're not going to be able to recruit and retain medical staff and healthcare providers in rural areas to the level that we'll be able to provide. And we need to also focus in those rural areas on solving chronic health problems, getting on top of wellness on the front end. We spend so much time and so much money on people that have bad outcomes later in life. If we get out in front of that, if we have programs that address that, then I think we can save a lot of money in healthcare by getting on top of that on the front end.
Thank you. Claire.
So, I think it's really clear that the status quo is not acceptable, that we have to act. There are a lot of smart people in Congress who have put forward a lot of great plans. We have all mentioned aspects of many of them, and much of this is about getting this legislation through Congress. And but let's be honest, the strain that we are seeing on our healthcare system right now comes from a lack of preparedness. Our president has likened this emergency to a war. And thankfully for his bone spurs, he never had to go to war. He never had to prepare for war. But I can tell you that there is preparedness. There are straight and simple steps we can take to be prepared as a nation. And so that we can ensure that our doctors can focus on healing, right? As an intelligence officer, when I was getting ready to go to Iraq with my team of Marines, I was ensuring that every single person had all the PPE that they needed, all the protective equipment they needed. We knew where the backups were. Every single person was trained on their skill, their job, and the man or woman to their left and right as well. So we could fill in the holes. But we were also talking to experts. As an intelligence officer, my job was preparation of the battle space, making all of the operators aware of every single thing that they were going to run into, every single issue they could run into. I was talking to everyone who had been there before. I was reading Lawrence of Arabia. I was consulting the history books and looking back to the Vietnam War. I was, whereas this president is firing his experts and cutting funding to the CDC. We need to be prepared, and we need to be able to focus on the legislation getting through Congress.
Thank you. All right, the next question. The Trump administration has gone to war on the environment. they've reversed 60 environmental rules and are dismantling 38 more. That means mercury from coal plants, more polluted air and water, more haze on the Blue Ridge, the dismembering of rules of things like methane emissions that address climate change. What bill would you propose or sign to change this? RD, you're first.
Well, I believe that every American has the right to collect, store, and sell their own energy. And this is the vision for energy independence, energy freedom that I want to propose should I be a member of Congress. I think if you look at Virginia, for example, we have been locked in a monopolistic, centralized energy production mindset for as long as anyone can remember. And American innovators have been working to unlock a distributed view of that, where one American can put a wind turbine up or a solar panel, and battery capacity is coming along to make sure that we can have that, to partner that with the intermittent use from renewables. And so what I want to propose is that so the state has proposed to be, I think, 30% renewable by 2030, and then 100% renewable by 2050. Those are great goals. We should support those goals at the federal level by extending the tax credits for such installations. And we need to make sure that we are empowering our innovators in this country to help us solve this problem. The primary thing right now holding us back is this battery capacity issue. Solar installation is booming, wind installation is booming. Those are all fantastic, but we really can't get to this distributed view of how things work until Americans can have these batteries in their home. And let me just say this. This campaign does not take any corporate PAC money, so of course we don't take any Dominion money. But it is so frustrating to live in a state that has the same effective latitude as a place like North Carolina and to be beaten by the percentage of renewables that are installed. It's unacceptable. It's a direct result of Dominion's influence on our policy making, and it has to stop. It cannot be allowed to go on any further. And I want to be a champion. The 5th District actually has the most green energy jobs of any district in the state. And we need to double down on that knowledge of the fast growing startups here in Charlottesville and partner those with our rural communities and make sure farmers are involved in that discussion as well.
Thank you, John.
Well, clearly President Biden is going to roll back a lot of the heinous executive orders and get ourselves back into the Paris Agreement. That's a given. What I would look to do is to introduce a bill on infrastructure. We have to improve our roads, our bridges, our waterways, our highways, and we can use it with through green technologies. What does that have to do with the environment? Well, I think what you're seeing in a lot of the crumbling infrastructure that we have right now, Flint, Michigan being the prime example, is that people don't have access to clean air and clean water. And we actually need a Marshall Plan type of investment. And of course, I've talked about including rural broadband into that type of investment. But it needs to be done under a green lens, by creating, creating jobs around 21st century technology, renewable energy sources. And so I would look to provide stimulus to companies that would promote battery technology, that would promote electric vehicles. I would promote legislation that would incentivize companies to come in and build electric cars or build batteries technology, wind turbines, solar in America, and specifically in the 5th District. I really do think, and going back to the last question, talking about what the most important thing was for people in the 5th District is to get them back to work, get our economy going again, reshape it in a new 21st century vision that embraces clean energy and fighting climate change. And we can do it through good legislation and the right kind of jobs that we can create through that legislation in fighting climate change and protecting our environment.
Thank you. Claire.
So climate change is the greatest existential threat this country and the human race has ever faced. It is, we are seeing right now as the catastrophic response of our president to COVID, we are seeing what happens when we ignore science. We cannot afford to ignore the science. on climate change. This is an issue of national security. This is an issue that we cannot solve alone. This president has dismantled the EPA and the State Department. The State Department is the most critical body through which we work with all of our global partners to invest in our environment, in the earth, in the people on this earth in a way that addresses climate change. And I think that we have learned a significant amount just from COVID. There are some things we will take away from this, right? People can work from home. People don't have to commute. My sister lives in LA. The smog is gone. It's like being in a different country. She said it's literally like being in a different city. She doesn't recognize it. So, infrastructure, we have got to make sensible investments and incentivize the growth of the renewable energy market. And as RD says, individuals have to be able to store and sell their own energy. This is the way we incentivize the individuals and the industry. But we've also got to focus on our broadband. If we could bring broadband to every American, there's a lot more people that don't have to get in their car every morning. And ultimately, something I've been thinking about in the way that I think about the environment, it is directly tied to our healthcare. We can't be poisoning water supplies and talking about healthcare at the same time. We have got to take care of this earth and the people on it.
Thank you. Cameron.
Yeah, it's always fun to go last because that's what I love about this group. They get so many of the good ideas out there. What I'll say is that I tackle this a lot like I tackle healthcare. In medicine, sometimes you'll have a patient who has a fever of unknown origin. Their temperature will be high and you don't know exactly why. And there are all kinds of things that you could do, but what you should do is follow the evidence. Really have a systematic approach to how you figure out what the cause of the fever is. And at the same time, work to control the fever acutely and also to make sure that you're doing all the things along the way to really understand the problem and to work around it so that it doesn't happen again. I think here in this circumstance, we have a really good sense of the science. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has released so many just volumes of information on what is causing our climate crisis. Not only the goal of decarbonizing by mid-century, but exactly how important it is for us to limit the rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius as opposed to 2 degrees Celsius, right? We know exactly what we need to do. The question is, how do we do it? And I think as my colleagues here have already kind of described, it's going to take a combination of all of these things. We have to truly create a clean economy. And I think that that's the reason why so many people are excited about the idea of the Green New Deal. And the reason is because it is truly comprehensive. I think from my standpoint, the focus is doing something that's comprehensive, but I think the timeline has to be something that's achievable. It has to be something that's consistent with the guidelines. And to me, that's making sure we're hitting that 45% reduction from 2010 levels by 2030. That's making sure we're hitting full decarbonization by mid-century. And then the one thing that's really important to me is, listen, this has a unique impact here in the 5th Congressional District. If you've spent any time in Buckingham and Union Hill, when you're standing around looking at the spaces that stand to be damaged by the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, you realize we've got to do better. If you're in Cumberland and you're looking at that landfill, you realize we have to do better. This is very personal to people of the 5th Congressional District, and I hope to lead through the science.
Thank you. Next question. You've all touched on the economy, so let's stick with the economy. We're always told about elections. It's the economy, stupid. So our economy is in ruins. Keeping in mind that it is linked to the rest of the world, how do we fix it? Where do we go from here? John.
In 2 minutes or less. Again, I'm going to talk about some of the things I hit on earlier because I think they're worth emphasizing. We have to put people back to work. We have to realize here that our economy is not going to go back to the way it was. There's not going to be any normal anymore. Hospitality, retail, it's had the restaurants has a bottom kicked out from under it. E-commerce is going to be the way of the future. The jobs that people have had in our economy in the past, service economy, are not going to be there in this new economy. We have to look at And we can address big issues around this with respect to income inequality as well. We can bring those manufacturing jobs back into America. And I'm not an isolationist, but I do think for national security reasons, there are manufacturing jobs that we should be doing near shore or onshore, and creating those jobs. We need to again make sure that when we look out into the future, that we're creating jobs for our 21st century, that we're looking at investing in technology jobs. And again, we're hitting this over and over again with the green jobs, and with battery technology and renewable energy jobs. But we really need a focus, a total focus on that. But I think to recognize that we're not going to have the economy that we grew up in, and that we're going to have to pay people a living wage in this new economy. And we can solve this through creating, better jobs back in the 5th District, paying people and making sure that they can do it. They won't have to work 2 and 3 jobs any longer.
Okay, I think that's a mute. Going to you, Claire.
So, I think when we're talking about the economy, we're talking about our recovery and how we recover from this, because the economy today is going to be real different from the economy in November as well. And I grew up in a family that, struggled to make ends meet at time and moved around to get jobs. And I promised it would be different. I am heartbroken at the number of families that have been thrust into unbelievable economic certainty that were already there and have been pushed further down that road, and the number that are on the verge of falling into that economic uncertainty right now. So I think we have to talk about how we recover from this. And we do that by putting money in the hands of the American workers, addressing people's immediate needs. We cannot allow this country, we cannot allow our Congress to make the same mistakes we did in 2008. We cannot be putting money in the hands of CEOs and shareholders when people on Main Street are struggling to put food on the table. We have got to, it's ridiculous. I said this in the last forum, the LA Lakers are getting bailout money. But Roger in Earlysville here, the de facto mayor of Earlysville, a mechanic, can't get a loan. He hasn't made payroll in 3 weeks. He employs 10, 15 people right here in Earlysville, and he provides critical services to all of us. It's absolutely unacceptable. And so we have got to ensure that the way that we come out of this recovery is addressing the inequities that already existed, that have been so painfully highlighted in this crisis. But there's opportunity. We can move forward.
Thank you. Cameron.
Yeah, I say it all the time. COVID-19 caused a healthcare crisis about which we are all painfully familiar, but also this economic crisis. So 2 separate crises in one. And I think that economic crisis is unique in that, this isn't the same version of a broken economy that we saw back in the Great Recession in 2008, 2009. What we have here is that people are physically separated from the economy. And so in the short term, of course, what folks are trying to do is make sure that we're bridging the gap, both for small businesses and for employers and also for individuals. But we're just not doing an adequate job of that. And so the first thing is we just need to continue to put pressure on folks to stay afloat, until it's safe to reopen our country, have folks really engaging in the economy again. So that's kind of part of it. I think this COVID recovery, we're in this for the long haul, and we're going to have to really make sure that our small businesses, there's some equity there. We're gonna have to make sure that for individuals, they have what they need to meet their needs. But I wanna be clear, there was so much inequality in our economy prior to COVID-19 that we don't wanna go back to exactly what we had in January of this year, right? We want an economy that truly works for everybody. And so, that operates through a few things, and we have to be focused on having the infrastructure for a strong economy. here in the 5th, that looks like rural broadband. That looks like getting that last mile and using the federal government's role to make sure we're getting broadband internet into the homes of everybody in the district, into the homes of all the businesses in the district. That looks like fixing educational inequities. We've got 9, of the 11 schools in Danville, 9 aren't fully accredited. And so we still have to address challenges like that exist right here in our district. And the fact of the matter is we have to do a lot on education in order to be able to create the jobs of the future. We have to do a lot just on addressing issues in housing and addressing issues in residential segregation, the way that communities are separated from opportunity. So I think creating the strong and thriving economy of the future starts with making sure that all communities have access to it.
Thank you. RD.
Just last week, Emily and I had the opportunity to help deliver some school lunches here for Charlottesville City Schools at Friendship Court, which is in our neighborhood. And, as I looked at those beautiful white and brown and black kids, I didn't see as many parents, as maybe I would hope to. And it's because their parents were working. And it made me think a lot about my own mom, who worked at a gas station when we lived in Section 515 housing. People are hurting right now. They really are. And I think, what we need is a champion for the working class here in the 5th District. And I feel that in my bones when I go around the district. I feel that when I talk to people, when I talk to truck drivers, when I talk to folks that I meet, it's something that really drives me, is making sure that people who work with their hands can be a part of the future of our country, as they have always been. Now, about 65% of our economy is what an economist calls consumption-led, which means consumers are spending their money. And that's what most of the bills that have gotten through Congress have focused on, is how do we keep people consuming a little bit to make sure the economy is going along. But the next phase of the bills through the House of Representatives should really focus on investment, as others have talked about here, which is another key part of the economy. And how do we keep growing parts of our sector that have lagged? Now, traditionally, things like education and healthcare have been a little resistant to go online and to try to embrace some of the cost savings there. And we're seeing that play out in front of us here. And people in those sectors get more and more comfortable with that, not necessarily because they want to, but because they have to. Long term, this is actually a really good thing. This will bend the cost curve for those different industries. It'll make it much easier to deliver those services in those industries across a wide swath of our district here. And of course, that's what we all support, as we've talked about many times. A key thing that we've got to focus on is always workforce development. Is there a way for us to get grants for people who've lost their job during this pandemic to get retrained through an online training program? That's something we would definitely want to investigate and see if we can support.
Okay, thank you. Next question. We have 3 Marines and a doctor. Each of you have raised this as an important qualification for office as part of your past. Can you tell us, each of you, specifically what your role in the military or in medicine, why does that make you the best candidate? Claire.
Because, as an intelligence officer, my job was to look at, I wasn't presented with all of the different areas I needed to look at. I had to figure out what made up the problem set. I had to figure out all the different pieces of the puzzle and present them to the operators. And, people's lives were at stake. It was every morning we had a targeting brief, and every evening operators went out to act on those targeting packages that we put together. And their lives depended on the accuracy and the breadth of our vision and understanding of the environment we were in. And beyond that, I was a victim. I was assaulted by another Marine officer. And I was told by the Marine Corps that it wasn't a crime. And I knew better, and I was unwilling to stand down. And I fought the Marine Corps. I took my case to civilian court. The man who assaulted me pled guilty and went to jail for 1.5 years. I know what it means to look in the face of a massive bureaucracy and be told, no, you are not the same as us. You don't have rights, and you won't have justice. And I know what it means to look them in the eye and say, that's just not good enough. And, so I think it's a combination of my training to look at a problem set and figure out multiple solutions and recommend one with with as much confidence as possible. But I think it's also that I am willing to fight. I have made the sacrifice for this country. I am willing to continue making that sacrifice, and I'm ready to take on the tough fights that matter most to this district.
Thank you. Cameron.
What I love about this cohort of my colleagues who are running here is that we're all passionate about service, and our careers do speak to that. I say often as a physician, for me, a lot of times the skill set that I'm bringing to the table is a skill set of listening. As a doctor, I walk into a room, I ask people where it hurts, they tell me, and then we work together to find solutions. And that's been one of the more comforting parts of this transition to campaigning, is that it's the same thing. When you go across the 21 counties and 2 cities here in the 5th, it's about using that listening skill. In a district that's this diverse, that's this broad, that's this sprawling, the only, I think when people try to define the 5th as one type of people, that's incredibly flawed. The 5th, as you know, Leslie, is incredibly diverse. And I think the strength of it is its diversity. And that's why we'll win this election in November, is by appealing to that diversity. The one thing that I have to say, though, is that being a physician, it's helpful. It's a service perspective in the midst of a healthcare crisis. I work on the coronavirus unit at the University of Virginia. I have a unique insight into the challenges in our healthcare system. And this is the healthcare election. But I'm more than a physician. I'm also a lawyer. I also have a health policy background. I'm a leader in health policy at a major university at the Commonwealth level, and I've worked in the White House on policy in healthcare. So what I'm bringing is both that practical on-the-ground skill, that passion for service, but also real experience, real expertise working at multiple levels. And I think the combination of those things is what's going to serve the residents of the 5th really, really well. Ultimately, when it comes down to it, the same thing that drove me when I was 5 years old to want to be a doctor was service to my community. And that is precisely the same reason why I'm in this race, why I'm passionate about serving in this capacity. I feel like we're all called to a moment, called to a time. Like I keep saying, this is the healthcare election, and I think that I have a lot that I can offer.
Thank you. RD.
I grew up with stories of William Henry Hofstetler landing at Normandy and, helping liberate a continent. And I think for me, I think I maybe wanted part of that. And I'm certainly not particularly brave or anything like that, but I did want to do my part. And I signed up as a Marine and went to Parris Island because I felt like my country had given me so much. I always say, look at these hands. These hands were destined to be worn down by picking up bales of hay or cut by barbed wire, as my father and grandfather would have had. But I just have a different trajectory because of where I landed and when I landed. And I think I'm the most blessed person in America. I feel very happy with my life. I love what I do. I love my family here in Charlottesville. And I think for me, being able to serve for 4 years as a Marine and do at least a little bit to advance that American ideal that everyone is created equally, that we are going to live up to those principles that are in those founding documents, which, by the way, were written here in Central Virginia by the first man who held this seat, which just proves that an imperfect man can have a perfect idea about what we are trying to do in this country, which is make sure everybody in this forum here is treated the same. Everybody's voice is uplifted. Everybody's experience is honored as we try to really hand the baton from one generation to another, so that people's life expectancy, so people's earnings, so how people are treated in our society always improves. And my time as a Marine really taught me that there is so much that we are the same in this country, not that we're different. I had plenty of Republicans in my unit, plenty of independents, plenty of people who never talked about politics. But what we were able to do is put all of that aside and put the country first to try to do our mission to protect the Marines and keep the country safe.
Thank you. John.
So I want to talk a little bit about leadership. Leadership is something that it's like culture. It's hard to get your arms around sometimes. It's hard to explain it. It's probably better explained because when it isn't there. The lack of leadership. Clearly, what we're seeing in this country now with our president is a lack of leadership. Lack of courage in the way that he handled deferring himself from the military, but also just the inability to put the people of this country and the citizens that he is supposed to be leading in front. It's always me, me, me. Being a Marine officer, the first thing that you learn is that you eat last. Your troops eat first. Being a Marine officer, you take care of everybody else before you take care of yourself. These are traits that I learned early on and early in my life, in my early 20s, when I went to officer candidate school. And it's ingrained in my culture, and it's ingrained in the way I lead my life. And I've brought that leadership into business. I've brought that leadership into elected office. And I have always sought to do the hard things, public service, put myself out there, always lead. That's what you learn in the Marine Corps. And that's what's so very missing right now in the leaders that we have, including Denver Riggleman, who wants to sit on the sidelines, and he knows better because he's worn the uniform, and do thumbs up with our president and give him a big slap on the back. That to me is absolutely unacceptable. So I would say I have a lot of qualifications. I retired as a colonel. I can list those, but it's the leadership piece that's truly defined me and that I've carried throughout my life.
Thank you. All right, we have closing remarks now. Each of you has 1 minute for something that maybe you weren't able to get to before. I think you've all been incredibly eloquent. So let's start with you, Cameron.
Yeah, for me, this is pretty straightforward. I think the ultimate goal here is to make sure that we pick somebody who's not just going to win in June, but can win in November. I think that we all have a different theory of the case. We all have a different theory of how we can win this district. And Democrats here in the 5th have lost 8 of the last 9 elections. We know this district is incredibly difficult, and we know it's not going to be easy to flip this district. But like I told you before, I think the combination of the issues where on healthcare, it's clear that both for Democrats and for independents, healthcare is the #1 issue. I can win on healthcare. I know that on the demographics, by expanding our electorate, right? It's, to me, it's about fielding a full team, energizing a full team, and making sure that the entire 5th is ready to go. That's going to be a key part of winning this race. And then finally, it's going to come down to building consensus, making sure that we can work with folks who are different than us. I do it every day as a doctor. I did it in the White House, and I can do it here. So I look forward to earning your support here in June.
Thank you. RD.
Yeah, guys and folks, I know how lucky I am. I had a friend once who taught me how to tie a half Windsor knot, who jokingly called me the first in my family to tie a tie, and he was not far off. Listen, I have lived the American dream, and that is what I want for every American in our district, around the country. And families in the 5th, families in the Piedmont, where the Huffstellers have been for generations, have been used to people coming from big cities to promise them stuff. None of that has ever happened. They have never been included in the future of the country. They're always left out, and they certainly feel that way. And all of the investment in things like infrastructure and education will show that that's true. And what I think I can bring to the race is the ability to go to those counties with an open hand and an open ear and an open heart and say, tell me about your troubles. You look like my grandma. Did you work in a textile mill? And I think it's the person who can get the folks who some support Trump to support us that's going to be able to carry the district this fall. And I think I have a good chance of doing that if you'll follow me here on June 23rd. Thanks for being here tonight. I really enjoyed it. Good to see you, my friends.
Thank you. John.
You're going to need a leader that's willing to stand up and do the courageous things. 50 years ago, last week was Kent State. Also, 50 years ago, this May 15th, was the shooting of Philip Gibbs and James Earl Green at Jackson State University. They were protesting the slaying of 6 unarmed black men in Augusta, Georgia, who were gunned down, shot in the back by police because they were rioting over the young African-American man who was killed in prison after being tortured. Kent State got CSNY to do 4 dead in Ohio. Everybody's forgotten about Jackson State and Augusta. Resilience and resistance, the NAACP talks about it. We're going to need leaders who are resilient and who are going to resist those that say that we can't stand up for our democratic values. And I will be that leader that will stand up for those.
Thank you. And finally, Claire.
So I think that this election is going to be about people feeling safe in their homes. People don't feel safe going to a grocery store right now. People don't feel safe seeing their mother on Mother's Day. So healthcare, the environment, all of these things are so critical that we tackle and deal with, particularly in our recovery. But I think that in the end of the day, we have seen that voters trust veterans. We saw it last cycle, and voters in Virginia seem to trust veteran women. And I have spent, my time in the Marine Corps was incredibly formative. I was taught to run towards the fight. That is what I am doing right now. And I will take on the tough fights for the people of this district.
Thank you. First of all, I just have to say thank you so much, all of you, for running at this really difficult time. Thank you, Rappahannock Democrats, and particularly Mary Sherman Willis, for bringing us here tonight. See you all at the polls on June 23rd. Good night.
Thank you.
Night.
Good night,
everybody.